All right, people. I'm nervous, and I don't get nervous very easily. But I'm also a little fan struck, so we gotta just get that out of the way. Hey,
I'm a scary
everybody.
guy. It's because I'm scared.
Listen, today, you know who we are. This is Press for Time. This is a show that I have been waiting for a very long time to do. I want to welcome our guest today. We have Rich Vreeland, also known as Disasterpeace. Rich, it is a
What's
huge
up?
honor to have you on the show. Thank you
Yeah,
so
my
much for
pleasure to
coming.
be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I figured we can get right into it. I mean, I have a million questions, so we'll definitely narrow them down. But
Cool.
first
I have
off,
one question. You guys have the same microphone. That's crazy.
I know, and it wasn't even planned.
it
Like
was not.
it
Does
It
that glow in
became
the
wasn't planned at
dark?
all.
Does that like glow at night or something?
Yeah, it's just
Oh,
a
it's
light
it's
up.
it's on and off switch, which helps, so I know if it's
Okay.
on or not. But it's funny because it went from not being planned to being planned because then we sent it to one of our other co-hosts. So we almost have the team in unison. We'll get
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
wow.
first and foremost, again, thank you for being part of the show. How have you been? How's life treating you in this post-COVID world? You know, as a musician, I know you've gone through a lot of changes with a lot of, having to do stuff on your own accord. But I think you've grown as a musician and a composer to do a lot of it at home. But how's life treating you in that world?
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I've pretty much been working from home most of my career. But yeah, I recently became a father, so that's been super awesome.
Congrats, man.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, I can't complain.
Awesome. Welcome to fatherhood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, being parents was like the onus for Benny and I doing this entire show. Is we were like, hey, we don't have time, and it seems like every other show that does anything even remotely close to gaming and stuff, it's all like single dudes that all live together in San Francisco, and we both have a mess of kids, and we're married, and we live and we work, different day jobs. So that's kind of where this all started. Was like, hey, we have kids, we don't have time to really invest in a lot of this stuff anymore. So let's make stuff for people that also don't have a ton of time.
Yeah, sure, and make it fun, make it social.
Exactly.
And the technology has helped, of course, because Tyler and I have not met in person yet, and we've been friends for almost a decade.
Oh, no
So-
way. Where are you, Tyler?
New Orleans.
Oh, cool. I've always wanted to go there. I've never been.
It's nice, man. It's nice to visit. Not great to live here.
Yeah, the weather.
Yeah, the weather and just it's such a big tourist attraction, man. Like it's so hard to do even the local stuff that it's like, hey, this is really nice. This is really fun. You can only go 3 months out of the year because the rest of the time everything's booked up or there's 9 million people here. And it's like, oh my God, I don't live in the city. I live just outside north of Lake Pontchartrain. And it's like, oh my God, trying to go into the city when everybody's in town, it's just impossible.
I believe it.
Yeah, it's not a place I want to visit. There's too many insects for my loving. we talk about that a lot on the show. But awesome. So I guess the most important question I really want to ask is, knowing that you've done a lot of synthesizer based music and you've gone from video games to movie composition, you went into It Follows. That's, I know, a hot topic that a lot of people bring up with you. It was a step out of your comfort zone because you mentioned that you're not like into the horror world, and also the time crunches that you had. You were doing that in a short window and such.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that's something that you'd like to like re-explore? Like, do you feel that that's something that is giving you a different sense of, I like doing this, or like I'd like to explore more opportunities in that realm? Because obviously your sound is unique and that makes it through all of your projects. But I feel like the type of movie, it being horror, darker, is that something that has maybe gravitated your interest going forward?
Not really. There's a reason. There's a reason I haven't done. I did this movie Bodies, 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 which is like horror adjacent. It's kind of goofy in a good way. It's not really a horror movie. But there's a reason I haven't done any other horror movies, and that's because I didn't want to. I think initially, there, like at that time, I was concerned with like kind of being pigeonholed. Like I had just done this one thing, and suddenly everyone wanted me to do horror scores, and I was like, well, I see where this is going to go, especially, as the kind of that wave of opportunities. There weren't a lot of opportunities that were of the caliber of It Follows. It was a lot more like slasher movies and stuff like that, which I really didn't have much interest in. I don't know. I have a hard time finding like the silver lining in some of those movies. You know, like the last thing that like there are definitely like horror movies or thrillers that you come away from and you're like, wow, like that was an awesome movie. Like I think of like The Thing or something like that, right? Like that's a really great movie. But you know, there are other movies that like say like The Ring or something, which is funny that it rhymes, but like that's a movie I really didn't care for. And I kind of came away from it and I'm like, why? Like, why did I even watch that? Like it was just kind of like there's no like you don't come away from that movie with any sort of like positive outlook, or there's no like silver lining to it. So I think that's kind of, and growing up I was a scaredy cat too, so I think all of that's kind of like is part of the reason. But you know, like I got asked to do Stranger Things shortly after It Follows, and then you know back in like 2016 maybe I got asked to do Death Stranding, the video game.
Oh, nice.
And you know, in that case, it was a situation where it was like they sort of had a sound already that they'd established that it sounded a lot like it was inspired by It Follows, and so it was a little weird to be asked after the fact to come in and like, hey, you want to like help us make this? And I was like, I don't think so. You know, like because I kind of like having that something new. Like it could be an empty canvas. It could also be someone else's sound, which I've done before. Like I've come onto projects where someone else was kind of starting to develop something and they wanted someone to come in and help them realize that vision. And that's really fun. But having someone come in and like, you know, ask you to sort of like do something that you already did to some degree is it wasn't really for me. So yeah, I mean, there's been like, I think there was a Saw project that I turned down, and I don't know. It didn't really seem like the direction that I wanted to go, I guess.
Yeah. I commend it and respect it 100% because I think, you know, coming from a world of being a musician, you know, opportunities are not always there. And like you said, sometimes it takes a certain sound or a certain thing that you've done to get recognized, and then you get demands of that essentially. So like that concern of, it's almost like if you think about the 80s and the 90s, the TV shows, you know, those actors that played those characters we grew up loving, that you can't separate them from the character. You know, like you'll see.
I always think of Jason Alexander because he's like,
he's
like the most typecast person of all time.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. I mean, it's George.
He was like a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah,
right.
Super classically trained. So tangent, but I loved him in. He played a serial killer in Criminal Minds. Obsessed with the Fibonacci sequence, and it was completely the opposite of every like George Costanza, everything he had ever been typecast in. And that was my favorite role of his when I was younger, like, you know, watching that and watching it grow up. I was like, oh my God, dude, it showcased so much more of what he could do outside of just being, you know, what he ended up, like you said, pigeonholed into.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a huge problem, especially for folks that are in entertainment in any way. Like you make something popular and it's like, great, now make 1,000 of that, please, so we can all make $1 million off it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge with that too is you think about the fact that, like you mentioned with Death Stranding, is they were not necessarily, you know, they were inspired by your work, but to have you do more of it per se, when, you know, it would probably be very hard to disconnect that. If you started creating something, you start feeling, this sounds like what I did over here. Right. You know, how are we going to diversify that? And
like, I didn't really feel like I had a chance to sort of like say something new, you know, and I'm sure I could have, you know, pitched stuff, but it would have been hard because they'd already established something, you know, they were comfortable with. And so it was all sort of it was all kind of, it was very surprising. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I think also with that type of scenario is, again, when these opportunities are few in between as far as like big potential chances, one, there's always that time concern, you know, can you do it in a time window? And also, you know, it's important to have some integrity when it comes to, you know, especially doing music. It's hard to just commit to doing something, and if you're not vibing with it or you're not feeling a connection to it, especially if they're pitching you the idea, like, to me, I feel like if they pitch you the idea, if you enjoy the pitch, you'll find a way to make it work for the most part. But in this case, when it comes to the reference point, because I think that's what's coming back to it, it kind of falls back to It Follows in a lot of cases. But
Yeah.
again, you've done so much. You've done Fez, you've done Hyper Light Drifter, you've done a lot of other games later on, and you've done several, TV shows, movies. There's a lot for people to look for, and I think the biggest challenges are people doing the research. So again, I commend you for having the library that you have, in my opinion, the short window, because as a musician, you can get that writer's block, and sometimes you can go a long time without writing. So to have that much in the library is really remarkable.
Yeah, well, I have been doing it for a while now. I am getting up there. I started in like 2005.
I know, don't remind us, because when we hear you hear like 15, 20 years nowadays,
20 years about.
We're just like, you feel old. Tyler and I have a 10-year age gap, so I get to at least remind him he's getting old too. So,
man. So, like, I know it's been beaten to death that David Robert Mitchell picked you up after hearing the stuff on Fez. But what was it like making the jump from games to movies? And what is the difference in your approach to scoring a game versus going in and trying to score a film?
Yeah. I think, in games, there's a wider sort of umbrella of possibilities when it comes to how you're going to technically approach scoring a game, because it runs the gamut from very simple, like, I'm just going to write looping tracks, for these levels, to I'm going to build a procedurally generated music system from scratch.
Yeah.
For the entire game. So it can get very technical. I've done games like Mini Metro, Mini Motorways, which are like that, where I didn't write any music. Like, I didn't open up a music software and write anything really. It's all just like code, So that's like a very different kind of project than obviously scoring a movie.
Yeah.
With film. I do appreciate the simplicity of it at times, that you just kind of get in there and just write stuff. And that's sort of my bread and butter as far as like what's the easiest thing for me to do, most comfortable. But, there are caveats and differences. Like, it's much more common in film to work from reference material, which can be really inspiring, but it can also be challenging, especially when you're dealing with a director who really likes a particular piece of music, and you're trying to one up that piece and do something better. So I think in my experience, it's been much more common to go through like many, many, many revisions on pieces of music in film versus games. The turnaround time is much faster. Games tend to drag on forever because of the technical aspect of making a game, whereas movies are less that way, and things are more locked as far as like timelines, and a lot of it has to do with budget as well, like kind of burning money when you're making a movie, when you're getting into post-production and stuff like that. So, my role in a film is generally no longer than like 3 months, maybe, and then I might be some trickle in there like later for like releasing a soundtrack or going to a premiere or whatever. With very few exceptions. The only exception that I've had is Under the Silver Lake, which I spent over a year working on, and that was because there was a bunch of pre-production music that I had to write in order to bring that music to production. Because they were shooting in different scenes that had musician, like live music in the scene, or so. And it was the nature of the music being very complicated for me to write. Writing full orchestral music, it being my first real. I had done like this game called Cannon Brawl, which is like sort of has like an orchestral marching band kind of style, but Under the Silver Lake was like my first proper like orchestral score, where I actually wrote with an orchestra in mind and had a team helping me with orchestration, and then the recording, the conducting, all that, the mixing of the orchestral elements, all that kind of stuff.
So it's funny. Under the Silver Lake was the one that I was like most interested in asking about.
Oh, okay.
So like specifically, I had like one nerdy question that I wanted to ask, like the piano scene where he goes through and does all the different pop songs. How much of that was like? Did you contribute? Hey, these are the songs we should do, or that was? I mean,
it wasn't all. No, I mean, David led with all that. You know, it was his idea. You know, he had songs in mind for the scene.
Okay.
And then, you know, myself and the producers were sort of like with him. We had a bunch of we had a few meetings, pre-production meetings about that scene, just like trying to figure out, you know, what songs we could actually get licenses for. It's like the most expensive scene in the whole movie.
Gotta be.
You know, music licensing is so crazy. The composer makes like nothing compared to the estates of all these, you know, music people.
Of course.
It's funny. But so I think most of the songs got licensed. I don't know. There might have been a few. There were a few things that had to be moved around, and I suggested some songs. I think I was the one who suggested Gymnopédie by Satie.
Okay.
Is it Satie? I can't even remember. I think that was in there. Yeah. And so then, you know, I worked on the arrangement. You know, I arranged the medley.
Okay.
And then we also had another person come in and play the medley, like roughly live, like during production, in order to, and then it was being piped into the actors' ears, you know, so that they could keep time with the scene, because the you know, the actor who plays the songwriter is not he's not like a piano player really. So that was all sort of like you know, pantomimed. And then there were issues, and then the day of shooting, because the piano, they had like taken out the mechanics of the piano, so you couldn't even push the keys down.
It was hollowed out.
Yeah, so even like having visually it look like you're hitting the keys, that didn't look quite right. I mean, it was sort of crazy. The whole thing is nuts. Like, it's just nuts. And ultimately, what you hear in the final version is not a live piano. It's all just synthesized, because at the end of the day, it just didn't seem like it was going to make sense to do it. Right. I did have this idea of like maybe using like a Yamaha Disclavier, or like one of these like player pianos to play it, but we were kind of messing with it until the very last day.
Interesting.
Like tweaking the performance and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of how that went. It was nuts.
That's awesome. Crazy.
So yeah. I was gonna say, how much, like, for your part, how much of it is collaborative, like at the time, hey, you're going through pre-production, production, post-production, all alongside the director, or is it a lot of, hey, this is what we've shot, here's my stand-in music, make me something that's kind of close to this, and let me know what you think?
It's pretty in and out during that period. One thing I forgot to mention with this songwriter thing is that we did work in like motifs from the film, like the Turning Teeth song, like the motif from that song is in there as well. And so that had to be prepared ahead of time. So that was the first thing I did, was write Turning Teeth. So that we had that material for everything else. But yeah, like, so pre-production was mostly me working on that song, going to meetings about specific scenes that needed music, like the songwriter sequence, the rooftop sequence with the band. They didn't have anyone to do hand choreography. David wanted the singers to do like something with their hands, so I had to like prepare that, which was not you know, something I'd ever done before, and probably will never do again, but it was fun. And there was one other scene I worked on, which was the cemetery scene, the mausoleum with the there's like a quintet, I think. So that was a piece where, like, you know, I think I pitched the instrumentation for that song, and then, you know, we arranged the song and recorded it, and so we had all that material going into the shoot, and they they coordinated with us, like the producers coordinated to get the people to play those instruments. Even they didn't really play the instruments, but they had the instruments that they could hold and pretend.
Right.
And we had to make sure that it looked somewhat realistic. So me and Kyle, the score producer, were there at the Mausoleum on that shoot day, which was like an 18-hour day. And we were just kind of sitting around waiting, for when we were needed. And that scene it's like a single continuous take. The main shot of that is a continuous take. So it was a lot of like laying on the floor, falling asleep next to like like graves. It was terrible. It was like, it's a morally questionable thing to do.
Right.
But I mean, there it is.
Hey, you got to do it. So since It Follows, you did Under the Silver Lake, you did Triple Frontier, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, and Bodies. So all of those
coming out actually.
Okay. All of those except Triple Frontier are A24 projects, yeah?
I believe so.
It
Follows isn't A24.
It Follows isn't, but everything after other than Triple Frontier, are you like contracted in with them, or is that just how that happened to fall? Like the projects that you ended up way. That's hilarious.
Yeah, because they all came to A24 in different ways. Like Under the Silver Lake was an independent kind of thing that got picked up, and Marcel was produced by a nonprofit. I can't remember the name of the nonprofit. And then A24 bought it, and then for distribution, I guess. And then Bodies was their baby. Like that was one of their studio projects. So
yeah. I didn't know if you were just like in the A24 Rolodex somewhere. They're just like, hey, we've got X, Y, and Z movies. We need to call Rich.
I guess. Yeah, I guess. I mean, but to be fair, like Silver Lake was because of It Follows. So it was because of my connection to David, and Marcel was because of my connection to Kirsten Lepore, the art director, who's a stop motion animator I worked on an episode of Adventure Time with. And the director, Dean Fleischerkamp, was a fan of my music. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Just funny that it all kind of
it's good. It's good to have the director be the one who's like, I really like this guy's music, as opposed to like a producer, because that doesn't always work well.
Yes, and you get a lot of pushback.
Yeah, because then you don't have a good rapport with the director. They don't really know what you do, or maybe they're indifferent to you. I don't know. So
right, and a lot of times, right, wrong, or indifferent. If you're getting notes from the producer, like, hey, you should probably use this person. I know. From my experience, a lot of times the director is like, hey, man, fuck you. Maybe I don't want to do that,
Totally. Yeah, notes. It's like, oh.
Yes, exactly.
Got 27 pages of notes.
Yep.
Awesome. Yep. I want to take a step back, if that's okay, and let's talk about your earlier years, because we've talked a little bit offline, and we mentioned that you are a native of Staten Island, a place that I'm also from. And obviously you've been a musician for a long time, but before you got into the world of doing composing with games and such, were there projects that you worked on that maybe never saw the light of day? As we're younger, we do a lot of things that we have high ambitions for, and maybe we mature and kind of things get left behind. Like, were you in local bands? Like, did you actually play in, little venues? We've talked about like the dreaded Dock Street of Staten Island, but I know you mentioned you have friends in the bands, but yourself, did you explore any of that?
I think I played at Dock Street one time. When I was like, I didn't really get into music that I was just starting to get into music and guitar in high school.
Okay.
And so I wasn't even really comfortable playing with other people until by that time I had like left. And
Understood.
I think it was like my first year back from college, that I started jamming with some friends. Just people who were like, people I went to school with, or friends of friends. There was a band called Sheetrock that I would play with occasionally.
Okay.
Or some of the members we would jam. We jammed a couple times, and that was it. I mean, like I think we played like a birthday party. So
I think we've all done that once.
I didn't play that many shows. It wasn't really my thing at the time, but I started playing shows later when I went to college. When I went off to Berklee College of Music in Boston, I really pushed myself to, and I think that really what it was is that the opportunities started coming in to do shows. People started asking me if I did them, and I was like, yeah, you know, and I had to like figure out what that would look like.
Right.
So, you know, I still remember my first like solo show and how nervous I was. Like, I played a show at Brandeis University, and it was just me and a guitar and like my laptop and, you know, like a shitty little amp.
We got to make it work, right?
That was the beginning of like 7 or 8 years of doing live shows, and I played maybe 100 shows in that time, and I never really loved it. It was always hard for me. Like, it was nerve-wracking leading up to it, and I never felt like the amount of time I had to put into practice was sufficient or like worth it. Like, I didn't have a natural practice, like I didn't have a natural routine for practicing my guitar. It just wasn't a priority to me. So instead of like just being a person who plays the guitar all the time and is like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna go play a show now, when I had a show coming up like a week before, I would like, oh, I need to start practicing for the show because, you know, I don't play my guitar ever, but now I have to. And then I would spend like a week just playing because, you know, I would get really like nervous about, you know, failing basically. And it was really hard for me to shake that. I mean, I definitely think that you build certain skills and resiliency from doing a lot of live performance like I did. And, you know, around the same time, I also started doing public speaking. And I got very comfortable doing that. And it just turns out, you know, for me, I just needed to feel like I had a plan. If I have a plan, I can go up there and do it. With public speaking, it's a little easier because you can kind of give yourself like an outline and you can sort of like follow the outline, and you can ad lib, and people respond positively to you ad libbing because it just feels natural. It's a little harder to ad lib on guitar in the middle of a song. So yeah.
Corey Feldman could tell you that.
Okay.
For anybody that's seen that, he's been he just goes on the stage and literally does this, and he's telling everybody he's soloing. It's kind of embarrassing.
Oh no.
But yeah, no, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I always wondered, because, you know, you think about the type of music you do, and you know, I feel like the world we're in now, you find more musicians that do that style of music that do play live. Wasn't seen as often in the past. You know, back then it was traditional, like live bands, guitar, bass, drums, things like that. But I feel like you gravitated more towards synthesizers, and do you feel like a better comfort with those instruments versus the guitar? Do you kind of prefer to go back and forth diversity wise?
I'll pull out the guitar if I feel like there's a reason to. Like, it's not my go-to anymore for ideas.
Okay.
You know, I've gotten really comfortable writing music with the keyboard, so that's sort of my go-to. You know, I'll even play guitar parts on keyboard, like, and it's fine. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I've just sort of evolved over time as far as like how I do things. And there was something really interesting though about in the beginning, like I wrote everything on guitar pretty much. So, and I would write it down in guitar tablature software. And then I would take that and I would like put it in like a, you know, like a chip tune or whatever. And I would elaborate on it and maybe add parts that I could never play. That was sort of the light bulb moment for me. It was like, wow, if I do this on the computer, I can write whatever crazy part I want. You know, I don't have to like actually play it. Like, I'm not limited by my physical capability. And it's funny to even think that that was like a thought process now, but back then it was, because, you know, guitar was really all I knew how to do. And, you know, I didn't really have the chops to like produce. I wasn't really producing. I didn't even really know how to use a compressor or an EQ. I had no idea what I was doing. So that's another reason I started with chiptunes. It was like, oh, this is simpler. Like, I'll just do this. I'll just focus on making like GarageBand stuff, and I won't worry so much about, you know, if I'm compressing this properly or whatever. So.
It's funny because chiptunes terrifies me.
Why is that?
I'm just very intimidated by it. I watch how people create it. I'm just like, I don't know if I could do that. You know, I learned a lot of music over my years of by ear, so I'm very mostly self-taught. But
cool.
Yeah, so like if I'm doing producing and stuff, I'll find myself writing it like drums wise. Like a lot of people program, I can't program drums. I have to be the drummer in my head, and it's just a very different methodology. So I commend you for, doing that.
I think the thing with chiptunes is you don't have any. There's nothing to hide behind. There's no, you can't hide behind like some sick sample pack or drum sound or whatever. Like it's pretty bare bones. So, I think that was really good for me, like developmentally, because it really forced me to focus on just like composition, like writing music. And I didn't have much of a traditional like composition education. Like even though I went to, Berkeley, I studied production. I studied synthesis. So, I took a couple of counterpoint classes and some harmony, and that was super helpful for me. But there was like, entire composition programs that are completely focused on writing. And, I never felt like I totally understood what it took to like create these like structures, musical structures. So I kind of just winged it, honestly.
You did a great job, in my opinion.
Yeah, it clearly works. So
if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, no kidding.
I guess that's the difference between someone who can write these really elaborate, like, or, classical sounding pieces, orchestral pieces, and somebody who, whose music is a little simpler. To some degree, that's my own limitation. Like, it would take me a really long time to write something as complicated as like, John Williams being inspired by Tchaikovsky or whatever. Like that would take me an insane amount of time to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
Understood. That's awesome. Thank you. Tyler, you have anything?
No, man. I think I nailed getting answers to Under the Silver Lake questions, which is a movie that, me and 7 other people really adore. It was great.
It is that kind of movie. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. No, that's awesome. And kind of getting an insight into what the process is like. I really like that. And
cool.
It's kind of seeing behind the curtain is my thing. Benny's a lot more. I am not super musically inclined. Benny is very much more on the music side and the game side, and then I'm mostly movies and also games. So it's cool to be able to blend those two things together. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, I just had one small question, and it's the fanboy in me.
Mm-hmm.
You've done studio albums for yourself in the past, and I feel like you probably haven't done one in a while because you've been very busy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any potential of you maybe bringing something out original that's not tied to, another project?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've gotten really comfortable with like figuring out how to like elaborate on material that I've written for projects, and to feel like it's something standalone and like I can get behind it. Like I kind of made my whole career around that idea, where in the beginning I sort of had very clear, like, okay, this is like Disasterpeace, like it's just like my artist stuff, and then this is like, Rich Vreeland, like composer for hire, and they were like different. But very shortly into my career, I was like, nah, it's kind of silly. I might as well just put it all in one umbrella and, try to maximize, like, for like PR purposes, it was I think a good choice, especially because I didn't really want to do any PR more than I had to. Just put it all under like a moniker and really just try to make it all really good, and anything that I liked, that I thought was good, I would be comfortable enough to release. And so that's how you get 63 albums. This, you just release everything you ever do for your job. And like, I'll give you an example. Like I did this game, Paradise Marsh. That was like the most recent game I worked on. And I put out like a soundtrack for it. But then I put out a second soundtrack, which is not called Paradise Marsh. It's called Standstill. And it's like taking one of the systems from the game and making a whole album out of it. So it was sort of like a spur of the moment idea. Like, what if we, like, it would be cool if I made an album, like an ambient album out of this system. And it was also something that I had always wanted to do because I had done, I think that was like maybe my third game that I'd done that had a procedural score. And I'd never really figured out how to make a soundtrack out of it, a standalone soundtrack out of music that's procedurally generated, because it's complicated. So yeah, I look at an album like that and I feel like this is cool. It kind of feels like I forget how you phrased it, but it feels like it
feels like it came from your heart with no inspiration. Well, there's inspiration there, but
yeah, like there's
something of your own,
something of my own. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the last thing I did like that was probably Disasters for Piano, which was like, I don't know, it was a while ago now.
Yeah, I think that was 2017.
Yeah, and I have another album that I have 3 albums I'm working on right now that are all like B-side stuff, like, music from films that didn't happen, or one-off tracks that I wrote for like I did these tracks for this game Sound Dodger, he just commissioned me to write music, like just write some songs. So that's really close to like just me, making what I want to do, and I really love those opportunities. So there's an album that's like almost a lot of it is that, but like an actual album that's just like music for the sake of music, I haven't done that in a while, and I would love to. I actually want to do a sequel to one of my earlier albums called Rise of the Obsidian Interstellar. Yeah, I
love
want
it.
to do a sequel.
Absolutely love that. That's kind of where I was getting at, but I figured, I know you got so much in your plate, and again, when you're pressed for time, no pun intended, but really a pun intended, we have to find time for things that we may not always want to do. Like, I have my music under a particular brand that I collaborate with other artists, but sometimes I just want to do something, and it's hard to find that potential to, justify that. So
yeah,
I look forward to whatever you release.
Well,
Either way. Absolutely.
Cool.
But yeah, I think Tyler, do you have any other questions or?
Not at all, man. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. We'll let you have the rest of your day, and congratulations again on being a dad and everything else you got in the works, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, we appreciate
me.
your time. Thank you again.
All right, guys.
Everybody, have a great day. We hope you take care. Have fun.
Take care.